Lacan was an excellent student of Freud's, and he emphasizes in Seminar 2, in the ninth chapter, Freud always tried to find a biological foundation for his psychology. In fact, usually the motivation for Freud's theories came from ordinary problems that Freud assumed must have a biological foundation. For example, Lacan writes in this ninth chapter talking about different theories of the mind that Freud has. The final theory of the mind he was developing in this book, which is Beyond the Pleasure Principle, included in here. Freud never fully developed the theory completely, but he stressed the origin of the theory came from his patients. So, like this. For a long time, Freud thought that most people always want equilibrium in their life. He thought also dreams were a reflection of this desire for equilibrium. But then, after the First World War, he began to treat some soldiers, and they had war trauma. Whenever they went to sleep, they would have horrible nightmares, and they would relive the war experience, and they would wake up frightened. This affected Freud's theory about the mind. He thought the mind's biology was always trying to make an equilibrium with the energy. And he thought it was difficult to explain the source of this energy, but he thought it had to be with neurons. It had to be neurological or electrochemical, biochemical. But this theory related to equilibrium changed in these final years because of these World War I patients. He thought if the mind is looking for equilibrium, why does it make these former soldiers relive the trauma? They go to sleep and they have a nightmare and they experience the trauma again and again and again. This was shocking to Freud, and he wanted to develop an alternative theory of the mind. In order to do this, he began to speculate on the functioning of biology in general. So imagine a single-celled organism. The most basic form of life, a single-celled organism, receives some nutrition from the environment, and then creates waste. A single-celled organism is very sensitive to the environment. It must accept all parts of the environment. Well, Freud believed the development from a single cell to a complicated animal or to a human functioned like this. At some point, a complex cell developed a cortical layer, an outside layer to protect from the environment. And this process continued for hundreds of thousands of years until finally you have animals that have sight and sound and taste and touch. These senses control and limit the environment. So he began to believe it is true that humans are always looking for this equilibrium, but there must be this other functioning in the human being when they can't produce this equilibrium. So when there is some extreme trauma, this trauma is somehow written into the brain, and it gets repeated again and again and again. Then the equilibrium does not function well anymore at all. Because of this idea, Freud began to rethink his theory and the purpose of psychological treatment. He began to think part of the purpose is trying to find that trauma, locate it, and help the patient deal with the trauma in a new way. Now, war trauma is an extreme example. Some people have ordinary neuroses that are not like war trauma, but they are some kind of malfunctioning, and they don't help people adapt well to their ordinary environment. In that same way, Freud believed part of the goal of therapy is to help those patients find the source of that problem and then approach it in a different way. So this works the same way from neuroses to trauma to psychoses, all the way up. But his theory of the mind in these later days was that psychological problems develop because the human does not and cannot achieve some equilibrium with psychological energy. That is one of the points that Lacan tries to continue to stress in his seminars as well.